Support comes from the History's Trainwrecks podcast that focuses on stories like a temper tantrum that changed history, the president who promised not to run again and regretted it for the rest of his life, the World War II general who lost his pants on a secret mission in enemy territory. The History's Trainwrecks podcast, available now.
As we approach 100 episodes, we have talked about a lot of things on this podcast. Most of them is just ways that people have died, right? We've talked about mostly how serial killers have killed a lot of people, and most of the stories also just end up with the character dying. Usually pretty standard. I mean, last week we talked about people who spontaneously burst into flames, but there are some insane ways that people have died throughout history, and we're going to look at 4 of those stories this week on Our Weird World.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World, episode number 98, which means in 2 weeks we have hit 100. And then a couple of weeks after that, we will have hit our 2-year anniversary. Crazy, right? So like I mentioned up front, this episode is all about just the craziest ways that some people have died. And we're going to look at 4 stories here. The stories of František Kotwara, Gouverneur Morris, Clement Vallandigham, and Iroko Onoha. These are all going to be nuts. All right, so let's jump into story time. Story time. František Kotwara was born in Prague, but spent his life kind of just traveling around Europe. He grew up to be very musically inclined, and he joined a variety of different European orchestras, which obviously he performed all over the continent. He eventually found somewhat of a home in England, where he published most of his compositions. His most famous piece was The Battle of Prague, based on the 1757 Battle of Prague, the literal Battle of Prague, during the Third Silesian War, in which the Prussians fought against the Habsburgs. I mean, come on, you guys know that. You guys know all about the Third Silesian War, right? The Prussians against the Habsburgs in Prague for some reason. Yeah. That one. And we all know the song. I'm not even going to play it. We all know how the Battle of Prague goes, right? Duh. On September 2nd, 1791, Kotwara visited a prostitute named Susanna Hill in Westminster. And after dinner, this is so weird, Kotwara paid her 2 shillings and proceeded to, build the blanket monster with her, if you kind of know what I mean. However, rather than just, the traditional trip to the old boneyard, Kotwara asked Susanna to cut off his testicles. Susanna, despite being a prostitute, probably being asked all kinds of weird stuff, she politely declined. And so Kotwara then tied a rope around the doorknob, fastened the other end around his neck, and then just kind of proceeded with more traditional forms of lovemaking. And somehow, I don't know how they were positioned in the room. I don't know. I don't know. But by the time the session was over, Kotwara had basically choked himself to death. So that's got to be weird. Because, you got to imagine, 1791, you're probably standard missionary. I don't think that anything else has been invented yet. Maybe. I really don't know. And so I'm trying to visualize this, and it's weird. So he ties a rope around his neck. We can get that. Ties the other end around a doorknob. I guess he closes the door, tries to make sure that the length of the rope is at least enough to get him to where the prostitute is willing and ready to accept him, And so maybe obviously the tension choking him out And by the time he's done, he's also dead, which that's got to be incredibly great timing if he's just like, bleh, and then dies right at that moment. Like that's skill. All right. But what if, what if he dies in the middle and he's just like, because like he's connected to the door, and so like he's not going to fall over, and he's just like standing there, he's dead, just kind of mid thrust, and then the prostitute's just like, okay, I guess this is over now, and then just kind of like backs away. So, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, I don't know, just a weird way to go. This next story, if you're a guy, heads up, this is not pleasant. Governor Morris was not any sort of like fancy governor or anything. Like that was just his name. His parents, for some reason, named him governor. He did end up serving as minister plenipotentiary to France from 1792 to 1794, which is just a fancy way of saying he was the U.S. ambassador to France. Although he was from New York, he ended up representing Pennsylvania during the Constitutional Convention of 1787, and he was a signer of both the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, and he wrote the entire preamble to the Constitution. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, and to make sure that the liberals don't take our guns ever again, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That's what it says. I just read it. It's right there. Probably the gun part's not in there, depending on who you ask, but yeah, he wrote that. But that's not why we're telling this story right now. Morris also gave more speeches than any other delegate at the convention. He gave 173, fun fact, most of which actually dealt with the radical idea of letting people practice the religion of their choice without interference, even if that religion was not Christianity. And he even made a lot of speeches on the even more insane notion that slavery was the exact opposite idea, that all men were created equal. All right, so this guy, insane. Like, come on. You know why everyone came over to America, so they can, practice Christianity the right way, and then, all men are created equal. White men are created equal. The white, heavily implied there. You know what we were talking about. But obviously, like I said, that's not why we're talking about him here. In 1816, Morris was having some problems going to the bathroom because he had a urinary blockage. And despite everything that he and his doctors tried, nothing worked. They could not fix the blockage. But this actually wasn't a new problem for Morris. Some years earlier, he had actually resolved another urinary blockage by shoving a flexible piece of hickory wood down his wiener hole. No. I know they have catheters now to kind of alleviate, I guess that's how it works. But even that just doesn't sound pleasant, right? Look, I'm going to be honest with you guys, all right? I feel pretty comfortable sharing this, and I think it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. I don't want anything stuck in my wiener hole, all right? It's not how it goes. It's not what God intended, all right? This time, however, Morris didn't have the hickory wood, so instead, he took out a sharp piece of whalebone from his wife's corset and started ramming it down his urethra in the same sort of way that you just kind of thrust a plunger into a clogged toilet. What a visual, am I right? Unfortunately for Morris, it did not work. Even worse, his repeated self-plunging had mangled his inside so much that he died from necrosis a short time later. God. Oh, man. I hate that story so much, but I had to include it. Next story here is of Clement Vallandigham, who was a career politician and lawyer from Ohio who ended up serving in Congress from 1845 to 1847. After that term, Clement became a staunch opponent of the Civil War because he really loved the idea of slavery. All right, he is on the opposite side as Governor Morris. He thinks celebrity, where did I get that from? He thinks slavery is the best thing ever, which, coming from a guy named Clement, I don't think that's super surprising. At one point, he was actually arrested for violating General Order Number 38, which made it illegal to criticize the war effort. So, like, if you're on the Union side, they had a law that said you can't criticize the war effort. So much for that freedom of speech, am I right? Why am I, doing all of the Constitution things right now? I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, it was basically you just couldn't sympathize with the Confederacy if you were on the Union side. But as a punishment, they actually sent him to the front lines of the war, where he immediately surrendered himself as a prisoner of war to the Confederacy. Can you imagine that now? Can you imagine the outrage that, someone criticizes the president, criticizes whatever war or whatever foreign presence we have right now, and as punishment, they just send you to the front lines, to the most dangerous part of that. All those people who spoke out against George Bush for invading Iraq for a second time, George Bush is like, all right, I'll just send you over there. However he talks, he talks weird, and they just send him right into Baghdad. Oh, I thought this was America. Well, sometimes America has dumb laws, and sometimes America's not as free as you think it was. This is why I love history, because every time I hear some dopey politician talking about how they're going to take our rights away, bro, they've been doing this since day one. The Confederates, after Clement surrendered, they sent him to Wilmington, North Carolina as an alien enemy. But without really having much use for him, they allowed him to leave the country on a blockade runner to go to Bermuda, where he then boarded another ship to Canada. Once he got to Canada, he kind of lived in a hotel in Windsor, Ontario. And from that hotel, he actually not only ran a campaign for governor of Ohio, but he actually won the Democratic nomination in a landslide. However, because I think there was way more Republicans in Ohio at the time, he was destroyed in the general election. And, this is the part where, if you are a party switch, party flip believer, this was still during the time when Republicans were technically Democrats and Democrats were technically Republicans, and then they decided to switch for some reason. I don't know. It's all very confusing. In 1864, Clement met with a representative of the Confederacy and actually discussed plans for a new country called the Northwestern Confederacy that consisted of Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois. And their plan was to actually overthrow the governments of each state and liberate any Confederate prisoners of war. They kind of had this plan, but nothing really ever materialized, obviously. They really didn't even get started. Well, later that year in 1864, Clement returned back to the United States, and President Lincoln, who was pretty tired of Clement just stirring up a bunch of trouble throughout Ohio, kind of kept his eye on him as he continued to make speeches against him and the Civil War. Well, when the war was over, Clement joined the Sons of Liberty after turning down offers to join the Ku Klux Klan, by the way. And he adopted what was called the New Departure platform, which kind of carried a lot of the same sentiments that Democrats held at the time without referencing their views on slavery. So it was a little bit more publicly palatable of a platform. Well, by 1871, Clement was out of politics and was back to practicing law. I don't know if I said that up front, but he was a lawyer. He was chosen to represent Thomas McGeehan, who was charged with killing Tom Myers in a barroom brawl in Hamilton, Ohio. And like any good defense attorney, like Clement was committed to doing whatever he could to prove McGeehan's innocence, which in this case, and as it is in many cases, was pretty hard to do since like McGeehan literally shot this man to death in front of several witnesses. Like a ton of people saw him do it. And Clement's job is just to be like, nah, he didn't, man. So before the trial, Clement was kind of talking with some other defense attorneys just about how awesome he was about to be and just how he's about to totally change the legal game thanks to this theory that he'd come up with that was going to absolutely prove McGeehan's innocence. Basically what Clement was going to do is they were going to reenact the entire like shooting. All right. And they were going to make movies about him. Books were going to be written about him. He was going to be immortalized as the greatest lawyer of all time. McGeehan, just all kinds of stuff. After a really impassioned monologue in the courtroom, Clement was going to demonstrate how McGeehan could not have possibly shot his opponent, but rather that Tom Myers, who was dead, had actually just shot himself instead. And so Clement, he's kind of, doing a little dress rehearsal in front of his lawyer peers. And so Clement then reached for the pistol that he had in his pocket and purposely snagged it on his jacket, just as he suspected would have happened in McGeehan's instance. And then, as Clement hypothesized, the gun would accidentally discharge, resulting in McGeehan's, attacker shooting himself. And then Clement accidentally shot himself with his own pistol. And even worse, he died the next day of peritonitis as a result of the bullet that had lodged itself in his abdomen. Although Clement didn't make it to McGeehan's trial, obviously, the demonstration, like the court ended up hearing about the demonstration. I guess, the replacement lawyer came in and said, "Oh, this is what he was trying to do." And McGeehan actually ended up getting acquitted for this. It actually worked. Unfortunately for McGeehan, he then shot and killed, he was shot and killed in a bar fight 4 years later. So, I don't know, man. Maybe if you're going to do demonstrations with guns, make sure it's just not loaded. Huh? Wow. Shocking thought there. Our last story here is the story of Iroko Onoha, who was a wealthy businessman in the Ogbadibo region of Nigeria. He donated a lot of time and money to his community. Everyone just really liked him. He just seemed like a really good dude. He even had 6 wives, which, I mean, for some people might sound like a fantasy. I don't know if I could do that. I think 1 is plenty, but whatever. So one night in 2012, Iroko came home late from the bar and decided to go to bed with his 6th and youngest wife. And as the two made sweet, passionate, sweaty African love, the other 5 wives were out in the kitchen or the living room or wherever they were. They all met and decided that the youngest one just couldn't have their man all to herself. And so once those marital relations had ended, the other wives burst into the room holding knives and sticks and demanded that Iroko share his husbandly duties with everyone. Got to be fair, right? Iroko resisted at first. He was just like, come on, God, like one is enough for the night. I was going to do an African accent there, but somehow that feels over the line. So I didn't do it. Are you proud of me? I showed restraint there. But look, the other 5 wives, they weren't having it, and they forced themselves upon him. And so after having sex with 5 of his 6 wives in immediate succession, which is pretty impressive. I'm not going to lie to you. That's impressive. Most men, I think, are done, impossibly done after one time. But to go back to back to back to back to back, it's pretty impressive. So as he's waiting for the 6th and final wife to come into the bedroom, Iroko died. And when his wives realized he was dead, the 5 older wives ran off screaming into the forest. The village leader then reported the incident to police, but because it's Africa and they have terrible journalism and just generally bad communication, we don't know how the story ended. We don't know if their wives were criminally charged. I don't know what your crime you're going to charge them with. Being awesome. Okay. But yeah, Iroko died doing it too much in succession. So, which also, I mean, like, how hard are you working when, because like, if you're going to be like, oh, okay, well, if you're just going to make me do this, I'm just going to lay here and let you guys just, ride me like that quarter machine in front of the grocery store. Such a weird reference. But yeah. So that, hey, guess what, guys? That's the end of our stories. Let's get out of here. Episodes like this are fun. It's just like there's nothing, like death is sad. Sure. We can all agree with that. But it's just fun to switch things up, not tell a horrifying story, not tell a really sad story where there's all this rape and torture and murder, but it's just people being silly gooses and ultimately paying the price for it. So it's always a good time. Now let's see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number one, if you have to choke yourself out in order to baste a ham wallet with baby gravy, like maybe you should just not. All right, take a break. Go on like a tolerance break or something. Come back a month or 2 or 5 later, and just kind of do it like a normal human being. But like if you're sitting there and you gotta like be choked and also have, your nips, your little chest buttons electrocuted, and then also have like a leech shoved in your butthole and feel it wiggling around, like you're going too far. You're going way too far, and you gotta stop. You just can't, because you're gonna end up dead. All right. Number 2, guys, don't shove things in your pee-pee hole, because it could cause some serious damage. All right. Whether you got blockage or that's kind of your kink, don't do that. It's terrible. It's awful. All right. And number 3, if you are a Mormon or you just got a whole lot of sister wives going on, try to spread it out. Maybe, if you got 6, give them a day of the week. Give them all one of their own days of the week. That's fair for everybody. And then you can rest on the Sabbath like the Lord intended. All right. But don't try to go all 6 at once. It's not good for your heart. All right. And clearly, you can die from doing it too much. Next week on Our Weird World, the final episode before our 100th episode extravaganza, and we are going to do a couple of stories about sports. Generally, I have not found very many like weird sports stories that like kind of span all kinds of crazy themes that this show would do. But I have 2 stories for you. The 1904 Summer Olympic Games, which were just a giant dumpster fire. We'll talk about that. And then I will also tell you the story of Jocko Flocko. Who was Jocko Flocko? You will find that out next week. All right. So thank you all for listening. Keep telling all your friends. Don't shove a whalebone in your pee hole, and keep it weird.